Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. Where I'm here today for another 5 questions, and this one is more specific about food storage. Now, I recently did one where I covered 5 points on food preservation, which they go hand in hand, but this is more specific about storing foods and questions I get quite a bit. So the first one is, and it's something I don't always think to mention, and that is if you are buying foods like such as the Mother Earth products that come in Mylar bags, you can get them in the plastic jars as well. I prefer to purchase them in the Mylar bag. I believe they preserve the quality of the product for a longer period of time than the plastic jars, and they're usually $1 cheaper to buy them in the Mylar bags than in the plastic jars anyway. And these are Ziploc, you can reuse them. However, the question is, when I purchase them in bags like this, do I just keep them in the bags until I open them, or do I immediately put them in jars and seal them up like I did with these sour cherries from Mother Earth products? Well, I keep them in the bag until I need them because they're going to be just fine in the bag. Now, when you're talking freeze-dried foods in particular, be it you have a freeze dryer and you're freeze drying your own foods, or you're buying freeze-dried foods in cans, bags, or whatever it is that you're storing them in, once you open that up, you need to find a way to seal it back up, vacuum seal. Like, let's say you're getting the number 10 cans like I used to do years ago with Honeyville. Well, once you open that up, if it's something that's been freeze dried, you really need to repackage it. Otherwise, if you don't repackage it in a form that you can vacuum seal it and keep all the air out of it, then they will go stale. And so you can see here, these are some organic freeze-dried bananas. Some of these things, just so you know, I do buy some of these freeze-dried things, the things we do not grow or do not grow enough of, to keep on hand. Not everything I buy is freeze-dried, like carrots. I get dehydrated carrots, organic ones from Mother Earth products, and we do grow them. We just don't grow enough, and I like to keep stocked up on them, especially for throwing into soups and stuff. But something like this, like the bananas or the mangoes like I have here, or the pineapple, those to me are luxury items. I stock up on them as while I can, so if we ever do not have access to bananas, pineapples, or mangoes, at least I have some organic ones on hand in a freeze-dried form. So that's the only reason I buy those. So anyway, one thing I like about freeze-dried fruits is that they're easy to powder up and use as flavoring. So I'm buying the bananas for making banana cream pie. I had opened up a bag of the freeze-dried bananas and used about half of them, and then the other half I put in this jar right here and sealed it up so that they will stay crisp and fresh. And that is highly recommended. I don't recommend, even though the bag has Ziploc, unless you plan on throwing an oxygen absorber in there after you open it every time. I don't recommend, once you've opened the bag, to just keep them in there. Now, dehydrated things like the carrots would be fine. But whenever I open another bag of carrots, I put it in a jar, and I don't bother vacuum sealing. I just keep it in there because I like dealing with jars better than the bags. Generally speaking, especially the bags this size. There's a few things in smaller bags, like their seasoning pack, the 3 onion soup dip mix, I do like using here and there every now and then. That's a smaller little pouch, and I do keep that in my cupboard right here, though I could put it in a jar, but most of that stuff in there I don't vacuum seal. I only vacuum seal if it's a freeze-dried item, such as the cherries, the bananas, and more. So the same thing applies to something like the Anthony's green coffee beans right here. Especially if the bag, this has been open, because I'm going to start working through it and practice more on the roasting my own coffee beans. But I'm going to be stocking up on these in these bags. These are good sturdy bags. I just keep it in here. And especially since they're green coffee beans, they do have a better storage life than pre-roasted beans. So you can keep them in the bags just like this, no problem. And they should last for many years, and they won't go rancid the way roasted coffee beans can go rancid, because the oils have then come out and all that, though I've never had a problem with any of them going rancid. We always have about 2 years worth of coffee beans on hand, have yet to have any go rancid. So no issues there, but I am liking the roasting my own, and so I think I'm going to keep doing that. But we got to work through our other coffee beans that we have. I just won't be stocking up on any more roasted ones. So anyway, there's that question there. Now when it comes to just storing in Mylar, you know, I get asked that a lot. You can do that if you want. You know, if you want to go buy Mylar bags and oxygen absorbers and desiccant bags and do that, you can do that if you want. That is not my preferred method of storing foods that, let's say any kind of dehydrated food or even my own homegrown beans that are dried. I do store them in jars. I do not put them in Mylar bags. I tried that for a little while. I really didn't like it. I was not happy with it. So I prefer to vacuum seal all my dried goods into jars, things that I get myself or dehydrate myself, you know, because so they're not already packaged up nicely like you can get here or here. Then yes, I do those all in jars. So let's move on to another question. And that is, a lot of times when I show pictures of my pantry, like this one here, you might even see 3 rows of jars stacked on top of each other. And so people ask me about this a lot, or want to come in and reprimand me about, you're never supposed to stack your canned foods. Well, that's actually not true. In fact, I did a video just on this, that how you can safely stack your jars. So even though I rarely trust .gov websites for things, if you go to the, was it National Institute of Food Preservation or whatever it's called, they even tell you, yes, you can stack your jars of pressure canned or water bath canned goods as long as you don't go over 3 jars high. So like I have right here. Well, these 2 things are dried. The 2 on the bottom are dried and vacuum sealed, where this is a canned item here. This is the pineapple zucchini. And you can stack them 3 high. However, this I just did for display. This is not how I stack them in my pantry. So if you look close at the pictures, you'll see a barrier between each layer of jars. So some of that is thin pieces of wood, some of it's thicker pieces of cardboard. I always have some kind of barrier. That does a couple of things. That helps displace the weight a little better across all the jars rather than a whole bunch of weight going onto the center of a jar like this. The other thing you'll notice in those pictures, this goes hand in hand, is that some of my jars, like, well, these are dried so they don't count in this case, but let's say this one, this is canned peaches. I have the band on here, but the band is very loose on here. But I've got home canned blackberries, no band. The carrots and the beans here, the salsa, none of these have bands on it. So why do I keep bands on some and not on others? Well, again, going back to the way they're stacked, whenever I have jars stacked on top of the others, the jars that are on the bottom, the 2 bottom rows, I do put the bands back on. Here's the difference. You don't leave the bands on your canned goods. You need to remove them, clean everything well, clean this, clean the band, and then they need to fully dry. Now, whenever I'm stacking anything, the bands then go back on loosely. And that is to help also displace the weight of the jars going on top. So what happens is more weight is going onto the band, which then is resting on the threads of the jar rather than directly onto the lid. Because we don't want to lose our seal. So that's why I do put the bands back on and put them on very loosely. But if they're stored on a shelf by themselves or they're on the top, I don't put the bands back on. Now let's talk a little bit about dried goods. You'll see that all of my dried goods here, I have dried ham, dried Italian chicken sausage, the dried cherries, and wherever the bananas went, and the beans, and the vanilla beans right here. All these, I put the bands on after I vacuum seal. Now, why do I do that? I do that because it's an extra safety measure. When it comes to putting bands on your jars, on dried goods, it's totally different rules. You don't have to follow the same rules as you do for canned goods. When you're talking dried goods that you vacuum sealed, I put the bands back on for a couple of reasons. One is to help keep the lid sealed, because it's going to be less likely to lose its seal if you put the band back on it. Don't put it on super, super tight, just snug. The other thing is, if by chance it does lose its seal, let's say especially a jar up here, and I'm reaching and I'm pulling that jar down and I don't know that it's lost its seal and I don't have the band to hold the lid in place, well, I'm going to have dried goods going all over the place, especially the way I do things, because I tend to do everything con brio, so stuff goes everywhere. So that is why I recommend putting the bands on. And even if it does lose its seal, at least having the band there will also help prevent it getting so much air into the jar and thus making the foods inside stale. Now there's some things that doesn't really matter so much with, like the dry beans, a lot of your herbs. These are actually herbs I'm working through, so they're not even vacuum sealed, but it doesn't matter. I only vacuum seal herbs that are going back in storage for a longer period of time. I don't vacuum seal herbs I'm working through, because most herbs will do just fine for a long, long time. No need to vacuum seal. I just do it as an added measure for anything that I know I'm going to store for quite a while. It's really not necessary though to vacuum seal those. Now I did cover this in a video I did just on this topic, but there are things that you really should vacuum seal, like any of your meats, especially any that have any amount of fat in them. Vacuum seal them so that will prevent the fat in those meats from going rancid, just like you can see here in this ham that I dehydrated up, which is quite tasty, by the way. And so are these chicken sausages right here, these Italian chicken sausages. I don't know that I'll ever end up cooking with these because they're so good just as a snack like these. So I might keep them on hand, just like the jerky I make, and then vacuum seal into jars. Question number 3 has to do with condensation in jars. So I've been getting asked this on a few different things. One had to do with someone who was storing oxygen absorbers. If you're putting oxygen absorbers in a jar to save them, to keep them lively, but you're seeing condensation in the jar, that probably means the oxygen absorbers were already activated, and they get warm once they get activated, and that's going to cause condensation inside the jars. Now the same thing's going to happen with any of your dried goods. If you take your dried goods and they're still warm and you put them in the jar and you vacuum seal it while they're warm, that can cause sweating inside the jar, in which you'll see condensation, and thus will cause your items inside to spoil. You should never ever vacuum seal anything into your jars if they are warm, and especially not hot. Let them at least get down to room temperature before you vacuum seal. And then the other thing would be if you're not getting your foods fully dry. The trickier things can be fruits. A lot of your fruits like peaches, apricots, and so on will always have more of a gummy kind of texture to it. It's very flexible and chewy. It's not like your freeze-dried goods. And it can be harder to tell if you're getting all of the moisture out because of the high sugar content. Well, you got to remember too, the high sugar content is part of what preserves those, and that's why a lot of your dehydrated fruits will be just fine in storage. I do still recommend vacuum sealing. But anyway, just pay close attention, watch them, and you'll see. But just remember with the fruits, the sugar is what's going to help preserve them and keep them from spoiling. Vegetables are easier because they don't have the high sugar content, and usually you can dry those nice and crisp, like I've done with green beans and snow peas. Those will dehydrate up nice and crisp and even stay that way even if you lose. I found with the snow peas, I've had some that I didn't get sealed up, or the seal came undone somewhere along the way and sat like that for a long time, and the snow peas inside there were still crisp. I was surprised. But it all is going to depend on what it is. But really it comes down to, if there's condensation in there, you're not going to fully dry. With vegetables and a lot of things, meats and stuff, try to make sure they're nice and crisp. If the meats have high fat in it, it's going to be like fruits with high sugar. You're going to have a hard time telling. They're going to tend to stay more flexible. So you might want to leave them out until they're fully cooled, and then just see if you can crush them at all. Even if they feel kind of greasy, you can see if they will crush or feel really hard. Herbs are always easy to tell, and vegetables as well. Just always learn how to feel these things. And then again, wait until they're fully cool before you vacuum seal them into jars. Okay, number 4 is about grains, beans, and so on, because I get this question a lot, and people ask me if they can vacuum seal their grains, their beans, their lentils into jars like I do with my other things. Yes, you can do that. I very rarely do that because I am typically buying grains, beans, and all that in larger quantities, and it's not as necessary for those things to be vacuum sealed into jars. Those I simply put in Mylar bags. I do not use oxygen absorbers. I just put them in the Mylar bags. If I'm putting them into a storage area that I want to be a long-term storage, then I will press as much air out of those grains. Usually I'll throw some bay leaves in there too, just as an added measure. Press as much of the air out as I can, and then seal that Mylar up well. Be it I'm using the zip lock on it, because that's the type of bags I try to get, or even using a flat iron to seal it up that way. And so I do that with beans, grains, lentils. And I have a video that's going to be more specific if you want to learn more about that I'll link to down below, my most recent one on that. But as you can see right here, these are the beans I grow myself because I don't get as many. And I do like to sell my beans as seed. Some I keep for seed for myself, and then the rest I keep for a protein source. And those I do vacuum seal into jars just to make sure, especially because I want to make sure the bean as a seed is going to stay viable as far as being able to plant it and get it to grow. And then question number 5 is about freezing meats, because a lot of people know that I've done away with Food Saver. I do not use Food Saver bags anymore. I'm done with those. I'm done with the plastic. I'm just done with them altogether. I'm tired of replacing my machine, and I'm tired of paying big money for their plastic bags. And I'm also, as much as possible, trying to get away from storing in plastic. So people ask, well, what do you do for your meats? Well, when I'm buying meats through Butcher Box, they've already been frozen in plastic, most of them anyway, which I would prefer if they were wrapped in freezer paper, but I'm happy with what I get. So in that case, since they're already frozen in that anyway, I throw them in there and they're well sealed. All the air is pulled out of them. I just throw them in the freezer as is. But if it's meat such as elk, venison, fish, anything that we've caught ourselves or was given to us and we wrap them up ourselves, I go with a good freezer paper. And I find that if you wrap it well, one of these days I need to do a video on it. I just have to have some meat ready so I can show you how I do it. I have a picture here. I was canning some of it and I was freezing some of it. I didn't think to shoot a video on how I wrap the meat when I do that. Some people will choose to wrap it in like a plastic wrap first and then put the freezer paper. But if you've got a good freezer paper, there's no need for plastic wrap. And I have never had any meat that's been wrapped well like that. I've never had it go get freezer burnt, where I've had it happen with things using a Food Saver, where the bag was either faulty or the Food Saver wasn't working properly because, you know, it's 2 years old now, so it's just going to go ahead and stop working. And so the bag lost its seal somewhere along the way, and then those things do get freezer burnt. Where I haven't had that issue with freezer paper when properly wrapped. When I do it, I lay it out like in a diamond shape. The meat goes down in one corner, and then I'll roll it over a few times, fold the ends in, and roll it the rest of the way, and then put a piece of tape over it. And that works really well for me. Again, when I get a chance, if it ever happens at some point, which I think it will soon, I don't know, I'll do a video showing you how I do that. So anyway, that's what I do. So be it fish, elk, venison, whatever it is, that's how I put it away. If it's not already sealed up in its own package, I don't unwrap it, frozen meat. Besides, it would be harder to get it wrapped up nice and tight if it's already frozen. I'd have to thaw it out first and then wrap it. So that wouldn't make any sense. So I just leave it in the packages it's already in. Okay, well, I hope that answered a few of the questions, and this is just what I do. And again, we all got to find our own way, what's going to work best for us according to our space, according to the types of things that we're putting up, and just what we prefer. It doesn't mean that one way is better than the other. It's that one way might be better for you than for me, and vice versa. Okay, so if you got any thoughts, ideas, tips you'd like to share down below in comments, just go ahead and do that so we can all learn from each other. And don't forget to check out the links I'll be putting in the description box as well. Okay, well, thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.